What the town whispers, they talked about Joseph Brennan's stable, the way people talk about things that make them uncomfortable in low voices at the general store. In careful asides after Sunday service, how he took in drifters, how the last one had been there 3 weeks already. Sleeping in the hay like an animal, how that one used to own the Cross Creek Ranch before he gambled it away, along with his wife and whatever dignity a man could claim. Daniel Cross woke to sunlight slanting through the stable slats, each beam carrying dust motes that swirled like accusations. His head felt split open. His mouth tasted of whiskey gone sour and the particular bitterness that comes from waking in places you swore you'd never end up. The hay beneath him scratched through his shirt. Horse smell, manure and sweat and leather filled his lungs. He sat up slowly, the world tilting, and tried to piece together how he'd arrived here. The memory came in fragments. The final poker hand, 3 queens showing. His last deed staked on the turn of a card, the river card coming down a 4th queen for the man across from him. The sound of his own voice saying words that didn't seem real. The ranch is yours. Before that, other losses. His wife's face the morning she'd packed her trunk, her voice steady and final. I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. Daniel. The bank's letter about missed payments, the empty whiskey bottles collecting in corners of the house like monuments to failure. You awake. Daniel's head snapped up, pain lanced through his skull. Joseph Brennan stood in the stable doorway, backlit by November morning, a pitchfork in one hand. He was maybe 60, with the weathered face of a man who'd spent his life working with his hands. His eyes held neither pity nor judgment, just the flat assessment of someone deciding if a tool was worth keeping. I'm awake, Daniel managed. You can stay if you work. Joseph's voice carried the economy of a man who didn't waste words. Stalls need mucking, horses need feeding, leather needs mending. There's bread and coffee in the tack room. Work earns you shelter and meals. Nothing more. Daniel's pride flared a dying ember in cold ash. He'd owned land, employed men. Now this stranger offered him charity dressed up as labor, the kind of work he'd hired others to do. I don't need, he started. Yes, you do. Joseph cut him off without heat. Question is whether you'll take it. The truth of it sat heavy in Daniel's chest. He had 73 cents in his pocket, no horse, no home, no prospects. The November wind cut through the stable door, promising the hard winter coming. He could refuse on principle and freeze with his pride intact, or he could swallow what remained of his dignity and muck stalls for bread. What time do I start? The words scraped his throat. Now. Joseph tossed the pitchfork. It landed in the hay beside Daniel with a soft thud. 6 stalls before noon. I'll show you the rest after. He turned and walked out, not waiting for response or gratitude. Daniel stared at the pitchfork. His hands already ached at the thought of gripping it, of the blisters that would come, of the weeks and months of labor that stretched ahead like a sentence. But he picked it up anyway, because the alternative was the cold wind and empty road and the absolute nothing he'd made of his life. The first stall smelled worse than he'd imagined. The first week, by the 3rd day, Daniel's hands had blistered or had broken and started to callous. Every muscle in his back screamed. He'd forgotten what real work felt like, the kind that left you too exhausted to think, too sore to sleep properly. Joseph worked beside him without comment. The old man moved through the stable with the efficiency of long practice, mucking stalls in half the time it took Daniel, lifting hay bales Daniel struggled with, mending bridles while Daniel was still figuring out which tools to use. He spoke only when necessary. Horses need consistency, same time, same routine. They know when you're angry or afraid. So settle yourself before you approach. Daniel settled nothing. He worked in bitter silence, resenting every shovelful of manure, every bucket of water hauled from the well, every moment of this degradation. At night he collapsed in the hay, too tired even for dreams. The morning of the 3rd day. He woke before dawn and made a decision. He couldn't do this. Wouldn't. There had to be something else, another town, another chance, something that didn't require him to scrape horse shit for a man who barely spoke to him. He gathered what little he had and walked to the stable door. The November wind hit him like a fist. It carried the smell of coming snow and cut through his threadbare coat as if the fabric were mist. Beyond the door lay Carterville's main street, empty in the pre-dawn dark. Beyond that, the open country, miles of nothing in every direction. Daniel stood at the threshold, 1 foot in the stable's warmth, 1 foot in the cutting cold. Behind him, horses shifted in their stalls, their breathing steady and peaceful. The smell of hay and animals surrounded him. Ahead, the wind promised nothing but more cold, more emptiness, more of the nothing he'd been running toward since the first drink, the first bet. The first lie he'd told himself about tomorrow. Where would he go? The question sat in his gut like swallowed stones. He had no answer, no plan, no hope of anything better than what lay at his back. He stood there for a long time, caught between the warm animal smell and the harsh wind, between the degradation of staying and the emptiness of leaving. Finally, he turned back. The stable door closed behind him with a soft thud. Daniel set down his bundle and picked up the pitchfork. His hands shook from cold or shame or simple exhaustion. He couldn't say. Joseph appeared from the tack room. Carrying 2 buckets of grain, he glanced at Daniel, at the pitchfork in his blistered hands, at the bundle set aside. His expression didn't change. "Horses eat same time every morning," he said. "Sun's nearly up. Best get started." He walked past Daniel to begin the feeding routine, not acknowledging what had almost happened, not offering comfort or criticism. Just the work, steady and certain as the sunrise. Daniel followed him down the line of stalls that evening. Joseph fried salt pork and made coffee so strong it could strip paint. He set 2 tin plates on the workbench without ceremony. They ate in silence. The only sounds the horses moving in their stalls and the wind picking up outside. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even conversation. But it was the first meal Daniel had shared with another human being in longer than he could remember. And something about that simple fact made his throat tight. November routines. The days blurred into pattern. Wake before dawn, feed the horses grain and hay, same amounts and same order. Muck the stalls while they ate, haul water from the well. 8 buckets per day. Check hooves for stones, brush coats, mend whatever leather or wood had broken the day before. Daniel stopped counting days, stopped planning his departure. His hands toughened into leather of their own. The work stopped feeling like punishment and became simply what happened between sunrise and sunset, a structure to hold the formless hours. Joseph taught without teaching. He'd adjust Daniel's grip on a hammer without comment, demonstrate how to read a horse's mood by the position of its ears forward meant curious. Pinned back meant angry or afraid. Show him how to condition leather with neat's foot oil so it wouldn't crack in the winter cold, how to stack hay bales so air could circulate and prevent mold. Daniel found himself watching the old man. Joseph never hurried, never wasted motion. He spoke to the horses in a low, steady voice when a mare spooked at a sudden noise. Joseph stood still and quiet until she calmed, then approached with open palm, letting her smell him, waiting for permission. "You don't force it," he said once, not looking at Daniel. "You wait. They'll come to you when they're ready." Daniel didn't know if he was talking about horses. November deepened. The morning frost stayed later each day. Daniel discovered that physical exhaustion brought a mercy he hadn't known. He slept without dreaming of what he'd lost. No nightmares of the poker table, his wife's departing wagon, the banker's sympathetic face, just deep, blank sleep that came the moment he lay down. He began noticing things, the way morning light angled through the stable slats, painting stripes across the dirt floor, the warmth of a horse's breath in the cold air, the satisfaction of a bridle properly mended, the leather supple and the stitching straight. Small things, meaningless things, but they were there, and he saw them. One evening in late November, Joseph made stew potatoes and carrots and some unidentifiable meat that might have been rabbit. He set 2 bowls on the workbench. Daniel had stopped being surprised by these wordless invitations to share meals. They ate in comfortable silence. Daniel's spoon scraped the bottom of his bowl. Outside, the wind rattled the stable door. Coming winter's gonna be hard, Joseph said. More words than usual. Deep snow, long cold, might get travelers through. Needing shelter. Daniel nodded, not understanding yet that this was preparation, not prediction. We make room. Joseph continued. Whatever they need. If we got it to give, you always take in strays, Daniel asked, then regretted the edge in his voice. Joseph smiled slightly. Reckon I do. Reckon you're proof of that. It should have stung. Instead, Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, the first acknowledgement between them of what this arrangement actually was. Not employer and employee, not quite charity either. Something simpler and stranger. Two men sharing space and work and the occasional bowl of stew. Why? Daniel asked. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Because somebody did it for me once, long time ago. Figure I pay it forward. He stood, collected both bowls, and walked to the water barrel to wash them. The conversation was over. That night, lying in his corner of the stable, Daniel realized he hadn't thought about whiskey in 3 days, hadn't even missed it. Didn't know whether to feel relief or loss at the absence of that old familiar need. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. December's lessons. Winter came hard. Snow piled against the stable walls. The water in the well froze overnight and had to be broken each morning with an iron bar. Daniel's breath plumed white even inside the stable, though the horse's body heat kept the worst cold at bay. The work changed with the season. More hay needed. More time spent keeping the animals warm. Joseph showed Daniel how to bank snow against the stable's north wall for extra insulation, how to recognize the early signs of colic, how to treat cracked hooves with a mixture of lard and pine tar. Daniel's body had changed. The softness of idle months had burned away. His shoulders had broadened from hauling water and hay. His hands were scarred and strong, the blisters long since hardened into calluses. He moved differently now, with the economy of someone who understood that wasted motion meant wasted warmth. The work itself had shifted quality in his mind. It was no longer punishment. No longer degradation. It was simply what he did, and there was a strange peace in that simplicity. No decisions to make, no bets to place, no futures to gamble, just the rhythm of feed and water. Muck and mend, day following day. Joseph continued his wordless instruction. He adjusted Daniel's hammer grip when they were repairing a stall door. You're fighting it. Let the weight do the work. He demonstrated how to approach a spooked mare that had gotten loose in the paddock. Slow steps, low voice, no direct eye contact until she settled. Talk to her. Doesn't matter what you say. She needs to hear you're calm. Daniel found himself speaking more. Brief observations about the weather. Questions about whether a particular horse seemed off its feed. Once, while they were mending tack, he told Joseph about his father teaching him to ride when he was 6 years old. The memory had surfaced unbidden, surprisingly clear. Joseph had listened without comment. Then asked, He's still alive? Died when I was 12. Joseph nodded. My pa taught me about horses, too. Good way to learn patience. It was the most personal thing either of them had shared. One morning in mid-December, Daniel was repairing a bridle when he noticed how the lamplight fell across his scarred hands, illuminating the stitching work. His hands, the same hands that had held losing cards, gripped whiskey bottles, pushed away everyone who'd tried to help him. Now they were building something, small things, useful things, a properly mended bridle, a clean stall, morning grain distributed in exact measures. The realization moved through him quietly. These hands were capable of creation, not just destruction. That's good work, Joseph said, examining the bridle. Stitching straight, won't come apart. The simple praise landed somewhere Daniel didn't know was still tender that afternoon. Snow began falling again, thick flakes that muffled the world. Daniel stood in the stable door, watching it accumulate. There was beauty in it. He realized the way it softened all the hard edges, made everything clean and new. When had he last noticed beauty in anything? Joseph joined him. 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. He passed one to Daniel. They stood in silence, watching the snow fall, drinking coffee that was too strong and too hot. The horses were fed. The work was done. There was nothing required of this moment except to stand in it. "Winter'll be hard," Joseph said again, as he had weeks before. "Might get travelers needing shelter." This time, Daniel understood. He'd needed shelter once, and Joseph had provided it without question. If someone else came needing the same, they'd do what had been done for him. "We'll make room," Daniel said. Joseph smiled into his coffee. "Reckon we will." The widow arrives. The wagon appeared just after sunset on a bitter January night, materializing from the snow like something conjured. Daniel saw at first he'd been closing the stable door against the wind when movement caught his eye. A single horse pulling a small wagon. The driver hunched against the cold. As it drew closer, he saw it wasn't a driver, but two figures, a woman with a small child pressed against her side, both buried in blankets that couldn't hide how they shook. "Joseph," Daniel called. The old man appeared from the tack room. Read the situation in a glance. He walked past Daniel into the snow, approaching the wagon with his hands visible. Unthreatening. "Evening, ma'am." His voice carried through the wind. The woman didn't answer. Her face was hidden in shadow, but Daniel could see how her arms locked around the child, protective and desperate. Joseph tried again. "You need shelter. Please." The word came out broken. "Just for tonight. We'll be gone in the morning. I can pay it. No need." Joseph reached for the horse's bridle. "Loft's warm enough. I'll bring blankets." He led the horse toward the stable. The woman stayed frozen in the wagon seat until Joseph added gently, "You're safe here, ma'am. Whatever you're running from, it ain't following you through this door." Something in his voice, the certainty of it. The absolute lack of judgment made her move. She climbed down with the child, a boy maybe 7 years old who hadn't made a sound. They followed Joseph into the stable. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, trying not to crowd them with his presence. In the lamplight, he could see more. The woman was young, maybe 30, with dark hair escaping from beneath her bonnet. Her face was pale but composed, the kind of composure that comes from forcing yourself not to fall apart. The boy clung to her skirt, his eyes huge and fearful. Joseph moved with quiet efficiency. "Daniel, tend to the horse. I'll get the loft ready." Daniel led the exhausted animal to an empty stall, removed its harness, began the familiar work of brushing and feeding. Behind him, he heard Joseph climbing the ladder to the hay loft, the scrape of hay being arranged into bedding. The woman's soft voice asking if she could help. Joseph's firm response, "You rest, ma'am. That's help enough." When the horse was settled, Daniel brought hot water from the kettle Joseph kept on the pot-belly stove. Joseph had the loft arranged, fresh hay covered with blankets. A lantern hung on a nail. The woman sat with her boy, both still shaking though the stable was warm. Joseph handed her a tin cup of broth, made it earlier, still hot. "Thank you." Her hands trembled as she took it. "I'm Sarah. This is Timothy." "Joseph Brennan. That's Daniel Cross." Joseph gestured without ceremony. "You don't need to explain yourself." "You're welcome to stay long as you need." Sarah's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "Just tonight." Joseph nodded as if he believed her, though Daniel suspected they both knew it was a lie born of pride. After Joseph descended the ladder, Daniel lingered at the bottom, unsure. Sarah was settling Timothy into the blankets, her voice a low murmur of comfort. "We're safe now, sweetheart. I promise. We're safe." The boy's whispered response. "What if he finds us?" "He won't. We're far enough now. And these are good men. They'll keep us safe." Daniel backed away from the ladder, her words sitting strange in his chest. Good men. When was the last time anyone had called him that night? Lying in his corner of the stable, Daniel couldn't sleep. He listened to Sarah's voice drifting down from the loft, soft and constant, soothing a child's fear. He didn't know what they were running from, didn't need to know. The terror in that boy's eyes told enough. He'd destroyed his own life through vice and weakness. Sarah was fleeing violence she hadn't chosen, protecting a child from something he was too young to understand. The difference sat heavy on Daniel's conscience. Somewhere in the dark hours, he made a promise to himself, silent and unheard, whatever they needed, whatever he could do, he would, not for redemption, not for forgiveness, just because someone should. Unspoken help. Sarah and Timothy didn't leave in the morning, or the morning after that. Joseph made no comment. He simply began including them in the morning routine, setting out extra bowls for breakfast, making sure the loft stayed warm. Sarah tried to help, but Joseph waved her off. You rest. Get your bearings. There's time. Daniel found himself helping in ways he couldn't name. Extra blankets appeared folded near the loft ladder. Breakfast portions grew larger. The potbelly stove stayed stoked higher, burning through wood faster than necessary but keeping the stable warm enough for a frightened child. Sarah noticed. Her eyes would find him across the stable. Wary but not ungrateful. She never asked for anything. Neither did he offer directly. The help passed between them unspoken, like water finding its level. Timothy remained silent those first days. He stayed close to his mother, watching everything with those huge, fearful eyes. Daniel recognized that watchfulness, the constant vigilance of someone waiting for violence. It made his chest ache. Boy might like to learn about the horses, Joseph suggested one morning while they were mucking stalls. Give him something to think about besides whatever he's running from. Daniel's throat went dry. I don't know I might scare him. You won't. Joseph's certainty was absolute. Just show him what you do. Let him watch first. He'll come to you when he's ready. So Daniel began working more visibly when Timothy was watching. He'd talk to the horses in a low, steady voice, copying Joseph's technique. Easy there, girl. Just checking your hooves, nothing to worry about. He moved slowly, kept his motions predictable. After 3 days, Timothy crept closer. Daniel's heart hammered. He kept his voice even. This is Molly. She's gentle as they come. You want to pet her nose? The boy looked back at Sarah, who nodded encouragement from the loft. Timothy approached with painful slowness. Daniel stayed still, letting the boy set the pace. When Timothy's small hand finally touched Molly's nose, the horse snuffled gently, and the boy's face split into the first smile Daniel had seen. She likes you, Daniel said. Can I help? Timothy's voice was barely a whisper. Of course you can. Daniel began showing him the basics, how to approach a horse calmly, where to brush long strokes down the neck, gentle circles on the shoulder, how to check hooves for stones. Timothy absorbed it all with desperate attention, as if memorizing instructions for survival. It was going well until Daniel moved too quickly. Reaching for a brush, Timothy flinched violently, arms coming up to protect his head, body curling inward in a defensive crouch that was clearly practiced. Daniel froze, horror washing through him. I'm sorry. I wasn't going to. I'm sorry. The boy straightened slowly, shame and fear warring on his face. Sarah appeared, climbing down from the loft in seconds. It's all right. Timothy, Mr. Cross wasn't going to hurt you. But Daniel could barely hear her. He was seeing himself. How many times had his wife flinched like that? How many times had he raised his voice, slammed doors, let rage control him? He'd never struck her, but the threat had lived in every angry gesture. This boy's learned fear was a mirror reflecting Daniel's own sins. I'll be more careful, he managed. I'll move slower. I promise. That night, Daniel stood in the stable door, staring at his hands in the lamplight. These hands had gripped cards and bottles and steering reins of a life careening out of control. They'd gestures in anger, clenched in frustration, pushed away anyone who tried to help. Could they build something different now? Could they gentle a frightened child? Earn trust instead of demanding it? He didn't know, but he could try. Teaching by lamplight. February came with temperatures so cold that water froze in the buckets between stable and well. But inside, warmed by horses and stove and human presence, life had found a rhythm. Timothy had become Daniel's shadow. The boy's fear had slowly given way to curiosity, then to something approaching joy. He helped with morning feeding, learned to clean hooves, practiced braiding mane hair under Daniel's patient instruction. Daniel discovered he had a gift for teaching he'd never known. He could break tasks into small steps, explain without condescension, wait through mistakes without frustration. With Timothy, he became the man he'd needed someone to be for him once. Sarah watched from her perch in the loft where she mended clothing and blankets. Her wariness had eased. She smiled now when Timothy laughed. Sometimes she and Joseph talked quietly while preparing meals. She'd found work at the general store sorting inventory. Keeping books. By month's end, she told them all, she'd have enough for a boarding house room. One evening, while Daniel was teaching Timothy how to oil tack, the boy asked, "Mr. Cross, were you always here at the stable?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Daniel could lie, preserve some dignity, keep the boy's newfound trust uncomplicated. Instead, he found himself telling a version of the truth. "No, Timothy, I wasn't. I made mistakes, bad ones, lost everything, my home, my wife, my self-respect. I showed up here with nothing, and Mr. Brennan gave me a chance to start over." Timothy considered this, his child's mind working through implications. Like us. Kind of like you. Different mistakes. Same mercy. "Mama says we start over now," Timothy said simply. "She says sometimes people need to find new places, leave the bad behind." The simplicity of it struck Daniel like a fist, a child's uncomplicated wisdom. You start over. You leave the bad behind. You find new places. Why had it taken him so long to understand what a 7-year-old knew instinctively? "Your mama's a smart woman," Daniel managed. "She cries sometimes at night," Timothy whispered, "when she thinks I'm asleep, but she says she's happy we left." Daniel's throat closed. He excused himself something about checking the well and walked into the February night. The cold hit him like absolution. He stood in the darkness, breath clouding, and finally let himself weep. Not from self-pity, not from regret for what he'd lost, but from recognition of what he'd been given, a second chance. Unearned, undeserved, given anyway. He'd been so focused on mourning his losses that he'd failed to see what he was finding. Purpose, community, the quiet satisfaction of teaching a frightened boy that not all men were dangerous, the privilege of being trusted with someone's fragile hope. "Cold out here," Joseph's voice, quiet beside him. The old man had appeared like smoke. "I was just—" Daniel couldn't finish. "I know." Joseph's hand rested briefly on Daniel's shoulder. "Come back in when you're ready." He left Daniel alone with the February stars and the understanding that grace wasn't something you earned. It was something given by people who'd received it themselves and knew its value. When Daniel returned to the stable, Timothy was already asleep in the loft. Sarah sat mending by lamplight. She looked up as he entered. "Thank you," she said, "for being patient with him, for showing him that good men exist." Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. That night, sleep came easily. The tears had washed something clean. The gesture. March arrived with the first hints of thaw. Icicles dripped from the stable eaves. The snow began its slow retreat, revealing brown grass and the promise of spring underneath. Sarah had saved enough. She'd found a boarding house that would take her and Timothy, and she'd start full-time at the store in 2 weeks. She announced this one morning over breakfast, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying mixed emotions. "That's good," Joseph said. "Real good. You've worked hard." Timothy looked stricken. "But I like it here. I like the horses. I like Mr. Cross teaching me things." "I know, sweetheart, but we need our own place. We can't stay in Mr. Brennan's loft forever." "You could stay long as you need," Joseph offered. "You've done enough." Sarah's voice was firm. "More than enough, but we need to stand on our own feet now." Daniel understood. He even approved. But the thought of them leaving opened a hollow space in his chest he hadn't known was there. That afternoon, he walked to town with money he'd saved from odd jobs Joseph had found him helping neighbors with repairs. Shoveling snow. He'd been careful with every cent, not sure what he was saving for. Now he knew. At the general store, he bought a book, The Illustrated Guide to Horses and Their Care. It cost more than he wanted to spend, but Timothy's face when he saw those drawings would be worth it. At the seamstress shop, he bought Sarah a warm shawl, deep blue wool. Mal made. The kind of thing a woman deserved when she'd survived what she'd survived and come out whole. That evening, he presented them. His hands shook. Timothy opened the book with reverent care. eyes going wide. "Mr. Cross, this is mine. It's yours, so you can keep learning. Even after you leave." The boy threw his arms around Daniel's waist. The hug, fierce and sudden and completely unself-conscious. Daniel's hands hovered, uncertain, then settled gently on the boy's shoulders. Sarah accepted the shawl with tears streaming down her face. "Daniel, you didn't have to." "I wanted to." His voice came out rough. "You've given me more than shelter and meals. You've reminded me what matters. Both of you have." Sarah stepped forward and took his scarred hands in hers. "You've shown Timothy what good men look like. That's a gift I can't repay. He was so afraid of all men, of loud voices, of sudden movements. You taught him patience and gentleness. You gave him back his childhood." Daniel couldn't speak, could only stand there while this woman who'd survived violence thanked him for basic human decency. That night, Joseph found him by the well. "You'll miss them." "I will, but they need to go." "They do." Daniel understood this completely. Sarah needed to prove to herself she could provide for her son. Timothy needed to see his mother strong and independent, and Daniel needed to learn that love sometimes meant release. "You could leave too," Joseph said. "Spring's coming, opportunities opening up. You've learned the trade, could hire on at a ranch, maybe work your way back to owning land someday." The suggestion sat between them. Daniel turned it over in his mind, the possibility of reclaiming some version of his old life, property, status, the things he'd valued once. "Or you could stay," Joseph continued. "I'm getting older, could use a steady hand around here, wouldn't pay much, but there's room and purpose and honest work." Daniel looked at the stable, this place that had been prison, then sanctuary, then home. He thought about Timothy's laughter, Sarah's grateful tears, Joseph's steady presence, the simple satisfaction of daily routine and work well done. "I'd like to stay." He heard himself say, "If you'll have me." Joseph smiled, always could use a good hand. They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the spring sky. Two men who'd found family in a stable and learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what actually matters. Spring. Staying. The April morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah's wagon was packed not with desperate flight this time, but with careful preparation. New clothes for Timothy, kitchen goods for their boarding house, the blue shawl folded carefully on top. Daniel helped load the last trunk. Timothy stood nearby, clutching his horsebook, trying not to cry. "You'll come visit," the boy asked, "every Sunday after church." Daniel promised. "And you can visit here too. The horses will miss you." "I'll miss them, and you." Timothy's voice broke. Daniel knelt to the boy's level. "You're going to do fine things. Timothy, you're brave and kind and smarter than I was at your age. Your mama's giving you a good life. You honor that by being the best person you can be." Timothy launched himself forward, arms tight around Daniel's neck. Daniel held him close, memorizing the weight of this embrace, the trust it represented. When the boy finally pulled back, Sarah was ready. She squeezed Daniel's hand wordlessly. Some things didn't need speaking. Joseph helped her onto the wagon seat. "You ever need anything? You know where to find us." "I do. Thank you. Both of you. For everything." The wagon pulled away. Daniel and Joseph stood watching until it disappeared around the bend. Timothy's small hand waved until the last possible moment. The silence after felt profound. "You all right?" Joseph asked. Daniel wiped his eyes. "I am. They're ready. I'm ready." He paused. "Actually, I wanted to ask if the offer still stands staying on permanent. I'd like to. Not just for work. This is home now." Joseph's hand landed on his shoulder. "It stands. Welcome to stay as long as you want." They walked back to the stable together. The morning routine awaited horses to feed, stalls to muck, leather to mend, the same work Daniel had once resented, then endured, then embraced. Now it felt like privilege. Daniel picked up a pitchfork, began his rounds. The sun streamed through the stable slats, painting familiar stripes across the dirt floor. The horses nickered their morning greetings. The smell of hay and animals and new spring air filled his lungs. In the third stall, a nervous mare shifted, agitated from the night. Daniel approached slowly, hand extended, voice low and steady. "Easy there, girl. Just me. You're safe." The mare's ears flicked forward. She stepped toward him, nuzzled his scarred palm. Daniel stroked her neck, feeling the trust in her acceptance. His hands, these hands that had gambled away everything, gripped bottles in desperation, pushed away help and love and second chances. These same hands had learned to gentle, frightened animals, teach patient lessons to a wounded boy, offer warmth without expectation. They'd learned to build instead of destroy, to create instead of consume, to give instead of take, outside. Spring was arriving in earnest, inside. Daniel Cross had already arrived somewhere more important at the understanding that family wasn't bloodline. It was the people who saw you broken and helped you stand. It was shared labor and mutual respect and showing up every day to do the work that needed doing. It was Joseph, giving shelter to strangers, Sarah, choosing courage over fear, Timothy, offering trust despite every reason not to, and Daniel himself, learning that true wealth wasn't measured in land or gold, but in the dignity of honest work and the bonds forged in service to others. He finished with the mare, moved to the next stall. The rhythm carried him forward. The work stretched ahead not as punishment or penance, but as purpose. And that, Daniel had learned, but was everything.